The New Zealand Bar Association says the legal aid system is not achieving what it should, as many people do not qualify for legal aid and also can't afford to pay for legal services. The organisation is calling on the government to increase the legal aid eligibility threshold as well as lower the interest rate when those people have to come to paying back the fees. It's also called on lawyers to take on more pro bono work so people aren't driven to defend themselves without a lawyer. The Bar Association releases its Access to Justice report tomorrow. The report says the government has contributed more money to community law services, but it's not enough. I asked barrister and author of the report, Maria Dew, just how low the threshold is.
The threshold for legal aid is $23,000, so you have to earn $23,000 or less, whereas the minimum wage is $34,300. Now, you can appreciate there's a gap of $11,000 odd there, and yet somebody on the minimum wage will really struggle to pay their own privately funded legal costs.
Obviously, there's that $23,000 amount, and that's if you're just a single person, but of course the threshold moves up if you have a partner or if you have dependent children. It goes up to $37,000 to $54,000 if you've got two children. But of course the gap is still there, isn't it? That you've still not earning enough to pay legal fees. Yes,
absolutely, because you've got somebody. Even if they do have a spouse and they're at the higher threshold, anyone really below 40 to 50,000 is going to struggle to pay legal fees of $300 or $400 an hour to get private legal advice. So there is still a very significant group of people that are not being able to access legal advice, and that's where they're turning to community law centres and citizens advice bureaus to attempt to get some assistance.
Or are they even self-representing themselves when they go to court?
Yes, or certainly, or being self-represented. So, and the courts are commenting on the increase of self-represented litigants, the difficulty it poses for them trying to work their way through the court system, the difficulty it poses for the court that is you're placed in a difficult position, judges are placed in a difficult position where they are having to try and to assist from the bench self-represented litigants, which of course our court system is not set up to do.
Now, and Marie, just to paint the picture even further, should these people even be able to access the right kind of justice and get through the court system successfully, they've also got to pay all these fees back at what is it, 8% per annum?
The legal aid is now considered to be a loan, which parties have to repay. The repayments can be very significant and scary for somebody that is on in and around the minimum wage, and particularly interest accruing on that. So often parties will look at that and say, well, yes, I might be eligible for it, but to take on that level of debt is just too concerning, and so they will shy away from even accepting a grant if they are concerned about the repayment obligations, or they take it because they feel they have to, and then they get into trouble with repayment
racking up all the debt, yes.
And racking up the debt.
The government's put $31 million towards this. Is that enough, and who is that targeting?
That is, some of that money is going to community law centres, as I understand. Some of it's more targeted to acknowledged groups that need funding, particularly in a criminal sense, and also to some aspects they are improving accessibility. But our view is that that is not enough. We know from our discussions with community law centres across the country that they are really stretched for resource, and that they have a lot of people coming in, migrant communities that are low-waged but actually employed, maybe doing two jobs but still can't afford legal advice. Those are the people that they are seeing day in, day out, not being eligible for legal aid, but really need legal assistance. And so the community law centres are filling a gap to an extent. Now, we think one of the solutions may be that lawyers and barristers particularly are able to offer their services at community law centres, through a structured system where there is triaging of cases. There is an assessment of whether they may be eligible for legal aid, and then they are allocated a pro bono lawyer. And so it's often that lawyers are sitting quite happy to do pro bono work, but they don't get those people approaching them because they really live in a very different community that accesses assistance through local community support.
That's Barrister Maria Dew. The association, that's the Bar Association, will deliver its report to the Ministry of Justice. Now, it recommends a working group be established from across the legal profession to advocate for changes. Anton Youngman from the Ministry of Justice said in a statement that, based on limited research, the Ministry has identified people self-represented in 51% of all active district court civil cases, a much lower percent, 4% in the criminal cases. Those figures were from late 2017. Now, while its data is limited, it believed there'd been an increase in people self-representing as seen in comparable jurisdictions.